Welcome to another week of Dan Really Likes Wine. One of the undeniably cool aspects of having a wine show is a large amount of wine gets delivered to my front door from estates and PR firms and people who'd like me to try something, a new vintage, something different, something they've made in their own garage. Now, if I'm away and I'm travelling and my wife takes delivery, I generally never see that wine again. However, if I happen to be home at the time, then I get to explore and discover what has been sent to me. And sometimes it's stuff that even for someone who gets a fair amount of wine, gets the goosebumps going and you do get genuinely excited. And I had one such delivery a couple of weeks ago when arriving at the front door was a vertical selection of what is pretty much South Africa's iconic wine. It might not be the most expensive wine in South Africa anymore. We've got a number of wines that are north of the R1,000 mark, but it's still a wine that's more than average in terms of cost and certainly way more than average in terms of what you'd expect from your usual bottle of wine. It is the Meerlust Rubicon, and this week it's a vertical tasting as we go back in time through 4 particular years of the Rubicon. And we start with one from the guy who put Rubicon on the map, Giorgio Dalla Chia. He has his own wine now under his own name. He makes some terrific wine, makes a very nice grappa as well, which betrays his Italian heritage. But it's for the Meerlust Rubicon that he is, and I suspect always will be, best known. And 2001 was one of those vintages that helped him to make his name. So what do we know of the Meerlust Rubicon? It's a name that has a certain gravitas to it. You see it on a wine list, you know that it's going to be not inexpensive, but it's going to deliver. It's a wine that's got a real sense of presence to it, and it's a wine that I think qualifies as South African icon. It really is in that status. It's a wine that's been pretty similar over the years in terms of how it's made up, 70% or thereabouts Cabernet Sauvignon. In recent years, there's been a little bit of Petit Verdot creeping into the mix, but at this point, 2001, it was 70% Cabernet Sauvignon, and then a split over the remaining 30% pretty evenly between Merlot and Cabernet Franc for what is a very classic blend.
Just go again, just go again.
You'll see, if you look closely on the glass, the sediment that speaks to the history of a wine that's now 17 years old. Legally, it's almost old enough to drink itself. It's a wine that's close on 2 decades, but it certainly doesn't feel that way. There's still a real youthfulness to it. Tasting notes of when it first came out suggested a youthfulness, and somehow through 17 years, I'm not entirely sure how, it's kept that. It's still got a very fresh feel to it, a very lively feel to it. Often wine of this age has that sort of slightly settled, slightly thinning out feel to it as it's just fraying away. This hasn't got that at all. It's clearly been kept extremely well, and it is a really good advertisement for why this Rubicon has become such a South African powerhouse. It is a big, you want to say Bordeaux blend, but I say Stellenbosch blend because it's got that classic red Stellenbosch feel to it, a really nice, strong, character-filled wine. The Myburgh family have put this one on the map together with Giorgio. He hasn't made the rest of the wines we'll be tasting today, but he has done this one, and this is one I'm sure he'll look back on with particular pride. Fast forward 4 years and we arrive 2005, so a 13-year-old Meerlust Rubicon, and a different winemaker here. Giorgio by this stage has moved on, and Chris Williams has taken over, and he has done every vintage since. The blend is pretty much what the last one was. There's possibly a fraction difference in the Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's pretty much picking up where Giorgio left off on a wine that, by the time Giorgio had bid farewell to Meerlust, was very firmly established as one of South Africa's very best. A lot of wines will tell you on the back that they believe they can keep for a certain amount of time, drink in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. This one says quite boldly, quite proudly, 10 to 20 years. We're looking at 13 to put that claim to the test. Okay. What's slightly strange here is that that actually tastes as though it's slightly older than the previous one, where you had the freshness and vitality there. Here this feels a little more settled, a little more sage, a little more wise, even though it's a 13-year-old versus an 18-year-old. Possibly a slight difference in the winemaker, there's a fractional difference in the makeup of the wine, but just as easily it could have been the conditions that year, it could have been the way the harvest came in, all these little things that change wine around. And it's one of the delights of a vertical tasting. You can't ever say scientifically that this is why one wine tastes a certain way and this is why another one doesn't, but what you can do is have a lot of fun comparing them, and comparing those two is all the more fun because they're both extremely nice. There were 4 years between wines 1 and 2, as there are 4 years between wines 2 and 3. The 2009 Rubicon, and this is one of those years that's spoken of in slightly hushed tones, the 2009 vintage. There are many winemakers who look back at 2009 as having provided some of, if not the best vintages of wines in recent memory. Why? It was a bit warmer, they feel conditions were consistent. However the reasons came together, the result was across the board really consistent, particularly red wines in the Stellenbosch area and indeed beyond. So of all of the 4 today, this is probably the one I've been looking forward to most. It's not the oldest, but it comes from such a special winemaking year. Oh, that's sublime. That ticks off so many of those standard adjectives when you have your list of what would I like to find in a really good red wine. It is incredibly smooth and yet without losing character. It's got an immense sense of presence on the palate. It's a deep, rich, beautifully made red wine. Little hints of all the right sort of stuff, from chocolate and tobacco to coffee, but all very subtly done and coming together in one splendid package, clearly helped by the perfect conditions in 2009. If Giorgio Della Chia set the standard for the Meerlust Rubicon, then I think with this vintage, Chris Williams took it to another level still. It's regarded as one of the finest, not just Meerlust Rubicon vintages, but one of the great South African red wines. And I will be guarding the rest of this very jealously. Quite often, after we've finished, I share one of the better bottles with Stefanos, my cameraman and director. Stefanos, there's not a chance you're tasting any of this. And so to our final one. 4 years, 4 years, 4 years, and now 5 years, because this is the 2014 version. And this illustrates the evolution of this particular wine, and that not just sticking to exactly the blend it's always been, Chris Williams over the last number of years has gradually introduced a little bit of Petit Verdot, a couple of percent to start with, edging up to this 2014 7% Petit Verdot. I often think of Petit Verdot as having that inky quality, and it just adds a very slightly different dimension to the wine. It's a little brave because you've got a wine that is such a standout wine and has become appreciated for what it is, but by the same token you don't want to rest on your laurels, and in this case Chris Williams has decided, although he's got something superb, he still believes he can improve on it just a touch. It's not that far off the 2009, it's not quite the same, but it is still another delightful wine. You can taste there's something very different. I'm not sure my palate's quite refined enough to have been able to immediately say, oh, there's definitely 7% Petit Verdot in there where there wasn't before, but you can taste that there is that just appreciable difference to the makeup of the wine, almost that little faint flicker of licorice to it, and just a slightly different tone. Again, it's incredibly smooth, but without losing its sense of character. It's a wine that got a very positive response from a guy called Greg Sherwood, South African in London, who does wonderful things for the South African wine industry, promoting in London. He gave it 94 out of 100 on his wine safari rating, and you can see why he gave it such a good mark. And it's only at 2014, 4 years now. If you think how well these ones have aged, and this one, almost a shame to have opened up quite so early. But that is part of doing a vertical tasting, comparing the newer to the older, and it's been a lovely journey, a lovely history lesson on what Meerlust do. And I'll be just as fascinated to see where the history lesson takes us. Will the Petit Verdot train continue? Will it ease off a little? Will the next generation of Meerlust winemakers change things around a little? Will the next generation of Myburgh family owners follow in Hannes' footsteps in having hold over what is one of South Africa's truly great wines? A real treat to have these four together, to compare them. Subtle differences all, terrific wines, each in their own little way, slightly different. 2009 certainly the pick of them, but all of them having a great deal to recommend them. And all of them saying what so much of our South African wine does. Gee, we make good stuff here in South Africa. Cheers.